Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Shaina Harrison, and I am the Education Director at New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This program is a part of our statewide education initiative called Connecting Communities to Prevent Gun Violence. We've been bringing together New York community leaders and survivors, elected officials at all levels of government, policy, and public health experts, healthcare professionals, and others to discuss gun violence and the solutions that save lives. New York State and local gun safety laws are some of the strongest in our country. And yet, gun violence is growing. It's a growing public health crisis across our state. The COVID-19 pandemic led to the rise in gun sales and illegal gun trafficking in New York from weak gun law states. The pandemic also led to a surge in unemployment and poverty and deepened other systematic inequities in the poorest communities in New York State. The factors combined with easy access to guns caused a huge spike in gun violence, disproportionately impacting Black and Brown New Yorkers. Before and during the pandemic, gun violence has disproportionately affected Black and Brown Americans, including Black and Brown New Yorkers, who are 10 times more likely than white Americans to be victims of gun violence, to be victims of gun homicides, 10 Black Americans under the age of 25 are 18 times more likely than young white Americans to be victims of gun violence. Gun violence is now the leading cause of death for children in the United States, also disproportionately impacting Black and Brown youth. It's important that we focus on holistic solutions to keeping our young people safe. As parents, educators, and members of the community, we have a responsibility to create a safer environment for our children. This means taking measures to prevent gun violence in our schools. We cannot allow the violence to continue. We need comprehensive solutions to tackle this complex epidemic. How do we address violence and public safety now while also ensuring justice and equity for all communities and survivors of gun violence? Which solutions are actually effective in addressing gun violence impacting youth? And which proposals we should be concerned about? To answer these questions and more, I'm extremely grateful that we are joined tonight by experts and leaders who are at the forefront of the field of gun violence prevention, public safety, and specifically are working on solutions to keep young people safe. We have Assemblymember Khaleel Anderson, who represents District 31 in Queens. Assemblymember Anderson is the youngest Black Assembly member in New York State history. No surprise, as he's begun organizing in his community at the age of 13. And his career includes training youth in civic engagement, a 2021 Lindsay Fellow in Government Leadership and Practice. Assemblymember Anderson has become a leading voice in issues such as food insecurity, housing, transportation, healthcare planning, and of course, gun violence prevention. He brings to the panel the deep knowledge of the challenges his young constituents face and of innovative solutions to address them. We have our program director, Teah, who teaches our 4-credit gun violence prevention program in high schools all across the city. Raised by immigrant parents who fled the Civil War in Liberia, he has dedicated his time to analyzing and uncovering the root causes behind many of the issues in our society. He spent the last 5 years as an educator at as an educator at Global Kids, a youth organization that teaches youth the importance of community, activism, and advocacy through global education. We have our new social worker, Xavier, an advocate for communities affected by gun violence, inspired by the working class, Black and immigrant communities that have shaped him. They seek to develop resources that center on collective healing and community care. We're also joined by Shante Martin, the social emotional academy leader at Williamsburg Charter High School. Shante has worked at Williamsburg Charter High School since 2010. Her career at Williamsburg Charter High School started working as a director of student life, the dean, for the class of 2010. In 2017, she became a social emotional academy leader for the senior class. Prior to working with Williamsburg Charter High School, Shante was the director of youth and community programs at the Red Hook Community Justice Center. I have to say she was my first boss and has taught me so much. So I'm so happy to have you as well. Shante went to CW Post Long Island University for undergrad school and obtained a master's in public administration from John Jay. And finally tonight, we are joined briefly by Rebecca Fischer, Executive Director of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. Rebecca testified on Monday at the House Judiciary Committee's hearing in New York City on victims of violent crime in Manhattan. Rebecca is here to give her take on what happened. Please take the room. Thank you, Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me as a part of this panel. I am extremely excited to hear more about the work that our team and Shante and Assemblymember Anderson are doing on school safety. But I wanted to make sure that I could come in here and give a brief overview of what happened on Monday, not only because I knew people would be interested, but also because it's all relevant. So as many of you know, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, decided to call a field hearing in New York City very close in time after the indictment of Donald Trump. And it was ostensibly called the Victims of Violent Crime field hearing to discuss how, basically New York City or Manhattan is a hellscape that is overrun by crime, and that local leadership, specifically Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, is responsible for all of this crime. So, I was fortunate enough to hear from the House Democrats at the end of last week, and they invited New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, me on behalf of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, to testify on behalf of the Democrats as to what the truth is, to what's really happening in New York City, and more so what the actual solutions are that will help reduce what's happening in our most vulnerable neighborhoods in terms of gun violence and other crime, and what Congress can do to make a change. So, just to set the scene, this was a field hearing in New York City at 26 Federal Plaza. It was quite the circus. The room was filled with supporters that I would put in the extremist category. They were definitely there to support Jim Jordan and Donald Trump. They had signs as such. And it was just a big conference room with a lot of press. And they had all of the different witnesses, expert witnesses, lined up to have a conversation to testify with all of these representatives from Washington. And I was very happy to see, of course, Ranking Member Jerry Nadler there. Congressman Dan Goldman was there, also on behalf of New York. Representative Adam Schiff was there. And there were probably about 10 Democrats, ranging from Rhode Island to Pennsylvania to Connecticut, to talk about what they were doing. And then there were probably about 20 Republican representatives there as well, of course, including Chairman Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz of Florida, and many others. So the bottom line is that our position was to relay, number one, that crime in New York City has actually been going down. And that is according to the New York Police Department's own data, that most crimes are going down, including shootings across the city and certainly in Manhattan. However, we wanted to also make the point, and it's an important point that we always make here, that just because it's going down does not mean that we don't have a problem. And we absolutely do have a problem. Largely the problem with respect to gun violence, however, is due to out-of-state guns, that we have a national gun trafficking crisis, and over 70%, it's actually probably higher at this point, certainly in New York City, over 70% of guns that are used in crimes and are illegal guns from out of state, from the iron pipeline, largely from states like Florida, like Georgia, and also Ohio, by the way, which is not part of the iron pipeline up I-95, but Ohio as well. We also made the point that all of these representatives represent states with much, much higher rates of crime and gun violence, and that they were ignoring that fact, and that they should go back to Washington and ensure that federal reforms are enacted, while also pointing out that not only have they not done that, but they have stood in the way of it, that they have blocked it, that their states have some of the weakest gun laws in the country. But it was absolutely a stunt, and they were certainly there to make the Manhattan District Attorney, who obviously is responsible for prosecuting Donald Trump, look like he isn't doing enough. But we all know that it takes, stakeholders from all levels of government and, community solutions to make us safer. And regardless of, what their experts had to say, and even in light of the fact that they had real victims of crime, individuals who really have suffered, who've been impacted by crime, in the last 3, 5, 10 years, and are survivors themselves, that overall, relatively speaking, we still are a safer city. And that if we really want to make change, it's incumbent upon Congress to go do something. And I also had the opportunity to talk about what solutions actually work, and that higher penalties and mass incarceration and holding people in jail while they wait their court date without actually having a conviction is actually not going to make us safer. And that adding more police to our communities and more police in our schools is actually not going to make us safer. And that we need to invest not only in ensuring that there's more gun violence prevention solutions on the ground, community-led, community violence intervention programs on the ground, not only in ensuring that we get more gun control passed, but that we need to invest in education, we need to invest in housing, we need to ensure that there's affordable, accessible healthcare and healthy food. And I really wanted to ensure that we made that point. And I think that, certainly when it comes to the public safety debate, and I want to be able to move on to this, that certainly when it comes to the public safety debate in New York, it is very much this, this conflict between law and order and what we really can do that's evidence-based and prevention-based to ensure that young people, communities don't get caught up in the criminal justice system and don't hurt each other, in the first place. And that's why I'm so excited that we're having this conversation around school safety, because with the rise in mass shootings nationally that are getting so much attention from the national media, and with so many young people being affected in communities in all of our cities, people are throwing things at the wall as to what could actually keep us safer. And I know that this group here knows, and I know that this group here is going to be able to talk about what solutions are equitable and just and informed by, trauma-based research and have, evidence to support them. So I would love to pass back to you, Shaina, and I'm now going to move to being an audience member so that I can hear more about this. And thank you again
so much, Rebecca.
Hey, Martin, again, for being here. We really love having you as a part of this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that update. I am an educator by heart, and so I'm going to obviously open up this conversation with an icebreaker. But before I do that, I want to let folks know that you have an opportunity to ask a question. So there should be a question and answer key here on your Zoom. Just click on it. Definitely drop your questions in, and I'll make sure I'll do my best to get to them. So I have my icebreaker, my first question that I want to ask the group today is, in one sentence, can you tell me what safety looks like to you?
Sure, I'll start.
Thank you, Shante.
To me, safety is feeling protected, and comfort and trust in those that are supposed to protect you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaina, for that question, and good evening to everybody who's on the call this evening. When I think about safety, it means resources. The communities that are the most resourced are the most safe. Resources meaning access to academic programs that go beyond 2:50 p.m. Resources that mean recreational activities for our young people. Resources that mean employment opportunities for young people and for middle-aged people. That, for me, is what a safe community looks like, a resourced community.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Frank?
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on what some Innocent said. I think safety looks like a space and a place where all folks are provided for, right? When folks have basic needs met, they in turn feel safe, and therefore the communities are safe.
Thank you, Frank.
Yes, agreed. I think like the point has been made about well-resourced communities, well-connected communities also come to mind. Having trusting relationships between all members of community, including those that are perhaps more marginalized, right? Thinking of like low-income folks, thinking about queer communities, immigrant communities, and all the word, right? Making sure that they have the resources they need, especially, and making sure that they are connected well within many different levels of community network.
Thank you, everyone. I've heard like a lot of this like key concepts around trust, connection, and resources, right? So I think that's a great way for us to kind of like go straight to Assemblymember Anderson. We know that gun violence disproportionately impacts your district, and that equitable safety and violence prevention are a priority for you. Can you tell us more about what your constituents are experiencing in their neighborhoods?
Absolutely. So I'm thankful to represent the 31st Assembly District in the heart of Southeast Queens, including the neighborhoods of Rosedale, Springfield Gardens, South Ozone Park, and the Rockaway Peninsula, where I call home. And, you know, when I think about these last 3 years during the COVID-19 pandemic, and even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, our communities had experienced violence, whether it's gun violence, whether various different types of violence, domestic violence. These are things that are prevalent in the neighborhood. But we've also seen a decline in that violence over the period pre-COVID, primarily due to the influx of resources and services in some parts of the district. Now, when I say a decline, I don't want folks to misconstrue that with zero. Things are still happening, but you know, we've seen a lot more resources pour into the neighborhood, infrastructure, employment opportunities, and so on. But of course, this is unequal, and that's the challenge that we're working to build on. But when I think about the parents and I think about the students, for which I was one in the school systems here in the Rockaways, a lot of them are clamoring for beacon programs, after school programming, things that would help continue to stimulate our young people's minds and be able to challenge them to use their brains, which is a tool to help advance not just their individual thoughts or ideas or their creativity, but something for the collective good. So when I think about safety, I really think about safety as it relates to your question. I really think about some of what parents and what some of the students have told me around the issue in the district.
Thank you for that. What are some policy solutions you support that will help reduce the shootings in our communities? Yeah, so I think that this is a holistic approach that we've got to take to address violence in the community. One of the things that is critical is that we have a cure violence program that actually works. The concept that we treat violence like a disease that is curable, and we throw resources at it in that regard, that is specific to the neighborhoods and in context of the neighborhoods is important. Now, there's a number of different policy things that I feel that we can push to help address this issue in a holistic way. And that means ensuring that every student can have access to conflict resolution programming and violence-based prevention programming in their schools. And I have a piece of legislation currently called the School Anti-Violence
Act, and that piece of legislation would essentially allow curricula to go into the classroom. It's good to have Shante on the call. I know she's an educator, so she can appreciate this. To have curricula in the classroom that help young folks learn how to resolve conflict. At the core of every incident of violence, is the inability for individuals to resolve basic conflicts. For as long as we have humans on this earth, as long as we have mammals on this earth, we are going to have conflict. Conflict is a natural part of human existence. And so what this bill seeks to do is say, hey, how do we work to prevent something before a firearm or before a weapon is used to resolve conflict? Because it's what folks turn to. And so we're looking to ensure that block grant-like style programming can be made available to school districts across the state of New York to provide trauma-informed, intensive counseling, violence prevention programs in schools, and also to engage people around this concept to train the next generation of leaders how to work to address this issue. And I know that our friends at New Yorkers Against Gun Violence here on the call, thank you, Rebecca, and all of the team, Frank and Shaina, for all the work that you all do, Xavier, have been doing great work going into the schools and educating young people on how to do this. Now, what are we talking about, right? It's a curriculum that we're looking to promote that teaches folk basic conflict mediation and conflict de-escalation tactics so that they can work to address conflict before it becomes what we see on the streets. I want to address crime at the root and not merely the symptoms. Folks see crime when it's become a leaf on the tree. I want to get it at its root, and part of the root is this. And so in addition, when I think about school safety, right, because tonight's subject matter is around school safety, we want to make sure that we have peace officers in schools. And what do I mean by peace officers? Not in its pure concept in its name, but folks that are trained to learn how to diffuse conflict. When we look at our officers in at least in New York City public schools, I can't speak for the rest of the state, these folks are not trained in de-escalation or conflict resolution. And so sometimes it can increase a given heightened sense of alertness in the school with the students. So we're looking to change the dynamic of what safety looks like in schools by creating a space where people are promoting peace and then promoting peace via conflict mediation, conflict resolution. And so those are the two pieces that, one bill I'm working on and another bill we're learning conceptually from our colleagues in the legislature on how we can work around the concept of school safety officers and look towards leaning more towards peace and conflict mediation.
Thank you for that, Assembly Member. We're working together, and we are so grateful to have you champion the School Anti-Violence Education Act this session. Can you give us a little bit more around what that actually is? And I definitely want to save some space as well for us to talk about what folks can do to help get this bill out there. Because I think that's one thing that we don't really talk much about, what everyday folks can actually do to promote of holistic changes.
The last part again, Shaina?
What can folks do? Folks that are listening to us here today, what can they do to support something like the School Anti-Violence Education Act? Yeah, thank you for that. So absolutely call your legislators and ask them first to co-sponsor the bill. Make sure I drop the bill in the chat when we go to Q&A so people can take a look at the legislation. But in addition to this bill, I also have another piece of legislation that I want to make sure I mention before I forget, that would require firearms that are micro-stamped, and those firearms go into a database so we can track, that information. Because a lot of times we do have what's called ghost guns, and we have firearms that, might have been involved in some criminal activity. Someone got hurt, someone got injured, someone lost their life, and it's hard to sort of trace and track
excuse downtown Far Rockaway. That's a little noisy out there. But in any case, like things of that nature. But we also want to make sure that VOCA dollars continue to get down to communities that need them the most. So that's why I have another piece of legislation, well, 2 other pieces of legislation that would ensure that the Office of Victim Services, which is a state agency that does an extremely poor job of notifying victims of what services and resources are available. So we're going to straighten that out with the 2 pieces of legislation that I have. One dealing with notification, God forbid there's a homicide, and one dealing with notification when there's an incident of violence. So I'm going to also drop those bills in the chat when time comes. But I have a vision, Shaina, and I have a vision that everybody who's on the call can be a part of changing the conversation around gun violence, where the conversation prior was lock folk up, mandatory minimum. I want to be able to help us prevent at the root. We got to get at the root. If we want to address this issue, we've got to deal with it at the root.
Thank you so much for that. I've heard folks say at the root a lot since we've been on the call, and that's going to make me go directly to Frank. Can you give us a brief overview of your role at New Yorkers Against Gun Violence and the Reaction Program that I'm very familiar with, and I know works really, really hard on focusing on gun violence at the root?
Awesome. How are you both doing tonight? Thanks for having me on this really important panel. My name is Frank Teah. I'm the program director at New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. I've been there for about 4 years so far. My first anniversary just passed, so happy to be on the team for so long. It seemed like longer. So the bulk of my duties include creating curriculum and really carrying out curriculum in schools and seeing how that's implemented, right? Also, working with our community partners, right? I'm training some of the facilitators who extend our reach to schools that we aren't in. So that's really the bulk of my duties at New York Against Gun Violence. In terms of the Reaction Program, right? The Reaction is a beautiful year-long program, right? Created by our Director of Education and our moderator, Shaina Harrison, and her students at XPS about 10 years ago, right? And the purpose of the program is really in the title, right? The goal is to equip students with the knowledge they need, thus empowering them to react to the issues in their community in a really impactful way. And this curriculum is a year long. It works, unlike most programs, it actually works throughout the school day. So students who like the program and also need, right? Everyone loves the program, but all students are in the class in the program at the same time, right? It gives students a chance to be an expert at a lot of these issues that they typically don't get to be an expert in, right? And the goal is we go through a lot of different parts of the curriculum. At the end, they come out as bolder, more confident, and more empowered advocates for themselves and their communities. So that's really an overview of the Reaction. It's a beautiful program. Sometimes it's hard to put in words how magical it can be, but hopefully that explanation did us some service, some justice.
Thank you for that, Frank. Can you give us an example as to how the Reaction Program has helped young people advocate for their own safety? For sure, right? So I think the thing is, if you speak to kids initially, they know the solutions, right? A lot of them, right? Sometimes they just need to be put in environment created by trusting adults that allow them to to flourish, right? So first we take kids through this curriculum that starts with personal and group development, right? Showing them that regardless of where you're from, your walk of life, you have ideas, identities, and personality that's important, and you deserve to be seen, right? Then we give kids more of why these things are injustices in their communities, right? This isn't a you issue. These are systemic issues that you all aren't to blame for at all. Once you equip these kids with this knowledge, they turn their anger to advocacy, right? It's no, wait, this isn't right. This shouldn't be done. I think far too long we've normalized things that shouldn't be normalized. So young people have a really special power to change things. They haven't been around long enough to be really hardened by some of the issues that adults are hardened by. It's no, wait, this isn't right. And we don't have to stand for this, right? Because when you all leave, this is our world to inherit. So we want this to change now. And I think through learning these things, through learning how much they've been this service, and to see how some other communities serve, they're no, we are deserving of all these beautiful things. We're deserving of new books, of new resources, of after-school programs, and we're deserving of life and safety, most importantly. So
doing these things definitely fires them up in a really good, passionate way, and then they're then really empowered to take a stance. And that stance may be speaking to their elected official in Albany, or it may be to doing a community service project in their neighborhoods where there's a need for certain things.
Shane, are you still with us?
Looks like Shaina may be having some technical difficulties. So Frank, I mean, maybe you can move on to just discussing a little bit more about what the curriculum looks like and what some of the conversations are, overall.
For sure, right? So we actually did a beautiful new lesson today, but before I get there, I'll give an overview. Our curriculum starts with personal development, right? Which is really about, it's you-centered, right? It's about like understanding your identity and giving visibility to that. Then the next portion is really important, group development. This is where Shaina and I, and Andrea and Xavier and Michelle go into the classroom. We're new folks in their school community. We're very much guests there. So they don't have to trust us. So the goal is to, if you want to accomplish something with these students, these young folks who it's our job to serve them, we have to get to a place where they trust us. And that's what those first two components do. Group development really lightens the atmosphere, and it does open up conversations that may not be the easiest, and they certainly may not be happening in their everyday school classes, right? Once that happens, folks do get a bit vulnerable with us and each other, right? And that does build a foundation of us speaking about really difficult topics. So those first two parts of our curriculum are essential to building the trusting atmosphere and allowing kids to know that, hey, we're here for you. I think that although they're in school 8 hours a day, I don't think they always have the certainty that everyone there is in their best interest. So Shaina, Andrea, myself, Xavier and Michelle definitely want students to know that we're here for you, and we are here to be a resource to you. So once we leave those situations, we kind of go into the misconceptions of gun violence, right? Which kind of gives kids the facts about gun violence around the country, how this shouldn't be normalized in the community, how gun violence shouldn't be normalized in America. This involves some stats, some figures, some comparisons to other countries. We then speak about how gun violence intersects with other parts of identity. So things like masculinity and hypermasculinity, right? And how this rigid box of masculinity does allow violence to thrive. Speak about violence against women. And we speak about violence against marginalized communities and marginalized identities. So all of these things kind of definitely stir the pot, and they give light and they show folks that, hey, this doesn't have to be this way. It's not this way in definitely not in every country and not in every community. Why do things work better some places than does somewhere else? And what can we do to make sure that we have those things that we deserve? We all deserve safety. So our last portion is advocacy, right? You've gotten comfortable with these educators, right? You trust them. You know that they're in your best interest. They've equipped us with all this knowledge to make a change. What do we do for it, right? And our advocacy component tells them who their allies are in elected office and how they can speak to them, reach out to them, and definitely bring some solutions that they've spoken about all year to life. So that's an overview of the reaction program, and that happens throughout the school year. And every year when we return to school, the students are there and ready to start again. This does translate into some of our summer programming, where we have the Miller Mentorship, where students who really enjoy the program throughout the year apply for a program where they get paid and take a deeper dive into their education and gun violence prevention. And with that being said, not only do you create students who care about making the school environment safer, but you create global citizens, right? People who care about the community and who feel a duty to change their community for the better.
Thank you so much for that, Frank. I'm just checking the chat. I have some questions here regarding the curriculum. Someone said, where in the day is the reaction program placed? Teachers often don't have time in the day to cover the curriculum they are responsible for. Do all kids get the program? What year? Every year? So there's a couple of questions around logistics. And so can you talk a little bit about how we work with the teachers in the schools and how does the curriculum show up every day?
For sure. So thank you for that question. Those questions seem really answered, like, wait, how could this happen? How is this happening? Is it like this seems like somewhat impossible. So this is how it works. We are in schools where we've either had a partnership or where folks have reached out to us and recognized a need for our program, right? So I do think just how we speak about building trust with students, we also have to build trust with teachers and administration. They have to, one, realize that this curriculum it works, right? And it's of substance. So I think through word of mouth and through seeing our program, many teachers and administrators are pretty convinced pretty soon that this could be a pretty good resource to their schools. There's been cases where Shaina and Xavier have gone to Shaina and Rebecca have gone to some schools and auditioned the program for students and principals, and they've automatically bought into it. So that's typically how we get into schools and we show folks that this does work. In terms of when and where we meet, our program does uncover a lot of history, right? There's a lot of like social studies, there's some geography in there, there's a lot of like text heavy, something that work in English. There's a lot of numbers. I'm a numbers guy. So it typically can work in a lot of classes, but in most cases, it works in either social studies, a civics, a law class, and in some cases health, because gun violence is a public health issue. So that's how it works throughout the day. And we're in schools anywhere from 2 periods to 5 periods per day. So we're at some schools for more than half the day in multiple programs, sometimes four classes back to back. So yes, all the students who are on the active roster of that class do have access to our program. And from that, they then become eligible for any advanced program we have, like our Miller mentorship in the summer, or we're going through a series of community programs where they can apply, they get paid, and they do their community a service, right, in a place where the community needs. So that's typically how the reaction program operates in schools. We operate in the few classes that our curriculum touches.
Thank you so much for that, Frank. I want to head over to you, Xavier. I know you just recently started when working with New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. We are so happy to have you. But can you give us a brief overview of your role at New Yorkers Against Gun Violence and the new victim support services we're providing?
Yes. So yeah, Shaina, as you hinted at, my role is new with New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. I am, as Frank also hinted at, involved in all of the schools that we are working in. We're in 6 schools across the city, including Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. I support giving a trauma-focused lens in the schools and offering that sort of insight into the curriculum. I'm also going to be responsible for supporting with mental health focused curriculum, recognizing the impact of mental health challenges in gun violence, whether as people who are victims of gun violence. As we know, mental health, people with mental health challenges are often victims of gun violence rather than perpetrators, and recognizing how the root causes of gun violence, as outlined in public policy challenges with poverty, lots of different issues to that respect, mean that youth are facing mental health challenges on a regular basis. And so to answer to those needs, I'm going to be building in a service curriculum. I'm also going to be informing young people about their rights with respect to the Office of Victim Services in New York State, especially with their right to access compensation if they were in fact the victim of a crime. So I will be assisting young people and adults affected by especially gun violence related crimes to apply for compensation from the state. And that might look like a lot of things, right? It could look like covering hospital bills. It could look like changing the locks if they feel unsafe where they live, moving expenses, any lost wages. This goes for victims of gun violence and also people who support them, especially parents, right? If co-pays are paid out, as child is dealing with the impacts of a gun-related issue, right? So supporting victims in this way, supporting healing, especially for all survivors of gun violence, recognizing that there are service needs within that as well. So being connected to a lot of different community-based organizations and social service organizations that might be able to answer to their needs in a better way. So being a relay piece and a connector piece to all of these between young people and these services. That's where I see my role. And of course, the advocacy piece. That's why we're here.
Thank you so much for that, Xavier. I think I have a two-part question for you as well. What are some of the unique challenges of working with young people who have experienced trauma, and how can schools best respond to those challenges? I'll start with that.
Yes. Okay. So the unique challenges that young people might face who have experienced trauma, that piece is delicate, right? Considering just like the developmental stage that they are in as teenagers, they have a bit of a distrust of adults. Some of it is healthy. Some of it means they need to like foster better relationships. But especially in communities that are Black, brown, immigrant, queer, right, which have been especially specific traumas. There's a certain mistrust of mental health systems. There's a certain trust of mental health care as something that they need necessarily. And there's good reason for that. I think of my role as a social worker, especially in Black and brown communities, might be seen as someone who is working in child protective services. So recognizing that there is a history and a social context involved in there means that I have to be delicate about how I build relationships with young people so that they may recognize me as a support system rather than an antagonizing person. So that's
Thank you for that.
And I think you had a second piece around how to ensure that schools respond to these changes.
Yeah, I mean, how can schools ensure that young people are aware of the resources that are available to them for seeking support and assistance? I know we work with a group of young people now that come to us and ask us for certain things, and I'm just grateful that we're there to be able to provide those resources. But some young people don't know. How do we make sure that schools can get this information out to their students?
Yeah, I think there's a certain aspect of it that is top down, right? And how administration communicates this to teachers to just refer to social workers. I don't expect that teachers to be extended beyond like their educating capacities because they do so much for students every day. But recognizing when a young person is in need of support and flagging that for social workers or other support people in school, culture teams, restorative justice teams. All of these members of a school community can help bridge some of those like gaps around resources for them to recognize that like victim services are applicable for young people in the unfortunate circumstances that we might see in schools. Just having an awareness around adults helps communicate that sort of bridge to young people, and making sure that those adults have trusting relationships with young people means again that they're able to spread those resources outward.
Thank you so much for that. I think that kind of like leads me to you, Ms. Martin, to talk a little bit. Can you speak to some of the programs your school has implemented that help promote positive school culture and safer school environments for your students?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Shante Martin, and I'm an academy leader at Williamsburg Charter High School. We have about 960 students in our school. It's a pretty big school, but we break our school down by grade levels. So each grade level has an academy leader, they have a social worker, an academic counselor, as well as college advisors. We also have a student life associate, which is like a dean for each grade level. So, but our student life associates are more so really involved in what's happening in the student's life, right? Like, so it's just not discipline, it's really restorative justice, conversations. Hi, how you doing in the morning? Seeing them during lunch periods, going into the advisory room. So just another trusted adult in the building that can connect students to the resources that they need. We also break our students down by advisory. So we have an advisory program in our school where we have 15 to 20 students who, to one adult. So the goal is to have a trusting adult for every student. And if it's not one of the many staff staff members we have in the school, at least it can be a teacher that is your advisor that you spend your 4 years with. So advisors travel with the students from freshman year into their senior year, and they watch them graduate. They call their names at graduation. So we have a really strong understanding that students need to have a person that they can go to in the school. We want them to have more than one, but if it's that advisor, that one person, that's okay too. We have after school programs every day based on student interests. So we have staff members that run after school programs, but based on student interest. We have an after school fair at the beginning of the year, and students can tell us what they want offered. So we have things from anime clubs to student court to basketball club, video game club, whatever the students are interested in, and of course our sports programs. So really, we're really about building relationships with students because we know this is so important for students to feel comfortable and to trust us and to let us know when things are not right for them, right? Or when they need support and when they need help. Most recently, we unfortunately had a shooting at outside of our school. Around February. So we already had these programs that we implemented, but we had this unfortunate incident that had happened outside of the school. So now we had to take a step back and figure out what else can we offer? What are some things that we can bring into the school to ensure that students are getting what they need? So our local police have been awesome. They have been providing programs for our students. We just started a youth advocacy, a youth council program with our PSA 3, which is the officers located in the housing projects. So they come every Wednesday during advisory and they meet with a small group. There's about 12 students in the group and they identify a problem that is affecting their community. So right now they identified a problem within our school that they want to address. And a problem outside of our school. So they're working on it. They're going to present to our leadership team. And then they're going to also have an opportunity to present at the mayor's office. So we're just grateful for that partnership because the students that are even in this program, it ranges, right? We have our top students who are doing excellent. We have students who are not doing so great, but they want to make a change in their community. So it's just really great seeing those students, especially the partnership with the outside organizations. And of course, our partnership with you all at New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. You have been awesome in helping us, especially after this incident that occurred. You've always been helpful whenever we need you at Williamsburg Charter High School, coming in to do workshops with our students as well as our teachers. Right? Because as I heard many individuals mention in the meeting, building relationships is so awesome. And so when our teachers are building relationships with students, it's so great for the classroom, right? But sometimes we need to teach teachers how to do that. Sometimes teachers come in and they just want to teach their content and go home. But no, it's not just about your content and go home. You really have to get to know students and know who they are and make sure that the content is relevant to the students. So that's really what we're trying to do within our school is continue to build partnership, community, and continue to have students that are nieces and nephews of students who graduated years ago come back to our school and they still have a connection with those same staff members and adults.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Shante. I think you've answered like so many of my questions. I do want to pose a question to the entire group because I see some questions in the chat where folks are saying, okay, we can keep our students safe in school, but once they leave school, that's when they're experiencing the most of their gun violence. So how have you guys gone beyond the walls of your school to promote community safety? What are we doing to make sure that our students are safe even when they leave outside of our schools? Anyone can answer, everyone can.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Shaina. So when we think about the kids leaving school, right? Like I'll use my office for example. Where my district office is here in Far Rockaway, we're in the corridor between two middle schools, MS 53 and Village Academy. And a lot of the kids are walking through Mott Avenue, and parents have raised concerns with our office and raised concerns just generally in the community about how those students are able to travel through the business corridor to get to their buses and then get home. And one of the ways that we can ensure that corridors like that, which I'm sure exist, and I know exist all throughout the school system, which students travel, is making sure that we continue to have but peace officers or folks who are a part of the Cure Violence group intervening and being a part of those corridors. So we've been working with our Cure Violence groups to make sure that they're doing proactive canvases and engagement, right? If we see an area that struggles with safety, we want to make sure that our cure violence groups are stepping in well before we consider law enforcement, because we want to make sure that there's a relationship there. We know that Mr. Jones is always going to be at the corner of Martin Central, so to make sure that our students get home safely. We know that Mr. Smith or Mr. Johnson is going to be at the corner of Foam Place and Mott Avenue as folks are using this corridor to get home. Those are some of the ways that we could help make sure the students stay safe. And it's not more of a teacher suck when I say that, right? Because teachers are already assigned so much and doing so many different things, but it's a community responsibility in that when we have groups and entities that are doing that work are able to do that. And that's why my legislation is so important, because after 250, when school ends, you know, you're having that ongoing conflict resolution and mediation conversations happening, so that if something does come up, folks know how to say, hey, somebody's name, somebody give me a name, Franklin, or whatever the case may be, Frankie, whatever. You need to chill out. You need to take a step back. You need to walk on the other side of the block. And so that way people can be able to have those skills and sets of resources. That's one way. But also, when you have cure violence in the schools, and even this program that we're looking to create through my legislation in the schools, you're able to pick up on that stuff in the school building, and you're able to diffuse it before it gets outside of the school building. You will all see in my conversation tonight, and in all of the presenters here tonight, is that we're always going to look at this from a holistic standpoint and a preventative standpoint. How can we work to prevent before something becomes what we see on the news and what we see on TV? And those are two ways to do just that.
Thank you so much for that. Anyone else want to?
For sure. A few years ago, when we partnered with the mayor's office, with Mark J, mayor's office of criminal justice, the goal was that we work with these community orgs that have crisis, have critical messages that do amazing work in the neighborhood. A lot of these community orgs work with youth who may have had some contact with the criminal justice system, right? But definitely want to get on the path to turn that around. So we work in schools, we see a lot of students. As we know, some students aren't in schools as frequently, right? Especially folks who may be struggling at home. And the folks whose data has shown are the most likely, unfortunately, to have contact with the criminal justice system. So for the folks who are not in school, a lot of times they are at these community orgs, right? Doing wraparound services, right? Or doing things that find folks employment, or folks who may have had some time in juvenile detention, who are home now trying to make a change for the better. So we work with those community orgs as well, right? And some of our programming extends to them. So not only are we in schools where we have a very large reach, we're outside with youth who may not be in the formal school setting, but still deserve to have resources and get this program as well. And we do that particularly to our program, Bronx Connect, and the Bronx, and also SOS Bronx, who we work with closely, who house a lot of these services at their office. So a lot of times, our days used to involve going to those programs either throughout the school day or at the school to work with those youth who may not be in schools in a formal way, but definitely deserve to have these resources as well. So that's the way that we're able to extend our reach outside the school and work with community orgs who have a reach that extends far beyond ours also.
Thank you, Frank. I have another question here. How can we help bring some of these resources to our local schools, or find out if they have any similar resources, or at least discuss with the administration to bring them in? I think folks really love what you guys are talking about today, and they're trying to figure out how can we bring these kind of programs to their schools. And that's open for anyone. I definitely do think that it might be a good way to kind of talk a little bit more about the bill as well, Assembly Member.
Last part, one more time, motorcycle.
I said that I think it might be a really great opportunity to talk a little bit more about the bill as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'm actually going to drop them in the chat too. I want people to take a look. But essentially, this again is taking the concepts that we're talking about here tonight, and creating one, making sure that folks can create what works for them in their communities as it relates to curriculum. Or resources for curriculum, excuse me. And so that the legislation, the way it's written, would allow folks to be able to apply district by district, school district by school district, so that these programs can exist in the schools and the classroom. But one of the things that I find so critical and amazing about what New Yorkers Against Gun Violence is doing is that it also becomes an after-school program as well, for our working class parents who always need alternatives. But these are stimulating alternatives for our young people. So I'm excited because as we're rolling out this legislation and pushing for its passage this session, we're going to be piloting some of their conflict resolution and mediation programs in schools in my district, so that we can see the fruits of their labor, and we can see how critical and important it is to help us reduce violence in a way that's meaningful and addresses it from the root cause. When I think about how I got my start, not just in the assembly, but just as an activist, gun violence and the pain that it causes our classmates, our friends, our neighbors, and students who we share space with, there had been no outlets. There had been no spaces to talk about those feelings, aside from the temporary grief counselors that come into the school and they stay there for a couple of weeks, and then our trauma is supposed to end there. These programs have a level of permanency to them, and this legislation is going to help advance that. I can't begin to talk about what that pain and trauma feels like and looks like, having lost so many friends during the school, during the process of my academia and school year in a public school system. But I know that programs like this will work, not just to heal trauma, but help prevent trauma.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes, and to reiterate, just want to again touch on the bill being the School Anti-Violence Education Act, to really get at just the ways that that what we're doing in schools currently with regards to gun violence prevention, with regards to giving young people a systems analysis, as well as a youth empowerment analysis, civic engagement values that will allow them to directly address some of the issues that they're seeing in their community with regards to gun violence, with regards to poverty, healthcare, housing, etc. And recognizing that this can be something that happens across New York State, right? It doesn't have to happen in just a select few schools that we're working in at the moment. It can happen in Albany, it can happen in Schenectady, it can happen in Long Island. But we need to get this bill passed to do that.
I think,
Absolutely.
go ahead, please. Something more.
Oh, no, absolutely. Just plus wanting what Xavier said.
I think, it's almost 8 o'clock now. We should be winding down, but I do want to pose a really big question. I think that there's been some misconceptions around why young people are actually picking up guns right now and actually bringing guns to school, right? I don't think that folks really understand some of the struggles that our young people are facing. Can we talk a little bit about what we're hearing in the classrooms? What are people saying? What are young people saying about why they feel like they need to pick up guns right now? Trent?
Yeah, right. So we talk about a lot of root causes, right? And I think there is this misconception that folks wake up one day and grab a gun and want to do harm. I think we really have to look at there are a lot of things unaddressed that happen before someone picks up a gun, right? There are things like food deserts, right? And food insecurity, right? There's students living in poverty, right? There's students living in households that unfortunately may have been affected by mass incarceration. There are also students who may not have enough resources and money to get to school every day and eat. All these things act as indicators that that increase the potential for violence and crime. So if we as a community know these issues, right, then I think it's our duty to work towards things that change that, all right? So those look like things like making sure that students have a way to get paid after schooling, right? Making sure that students have access to healthy food, right? Not just food, but healthy, accessible food. Making sure that there's so much data around summer youth programming in big cities and how that works as a deterrent to violence and crime. Idle time where kids don't have much to do are times where other things can happen. There are also data that shows that simple things in summertime, right? Like having access to community centers with air conditioning are things that also deter violence and crime, right? So all these little things that we may not think about all the time are proven deterrents to crime. And if we focus our resources and attention at addressing those, then we do address violence and crime, which is a result and never something in the beginning.
Thank you, Frank. Shante, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
Sure. Well, I would say too, because I keep going back to this building relationships. I mentioned earlier before we started this call that we just had our staff for students basketball game, and we needed this, right? We needed this. There's been a lot going on in our school after the shooting that occurred, and just trying to build trust back with our students. So I think that just building relationships with our students, getting together with students, showing them that we're here, we care about you, and most importantly, making sure our ears is to the streets, right? We have to know what's happening in order for us to address the situation. But students are not going to feel comfortable in saying anything or talking to us if they feel like we are against them, right? Teachers, staff members that are in the building. So I think our biggest thing that we need to do, and I heard on the call tonight, is that we have to listen to our students. We have to be there, like the assemblyman said, on the corners, working with students as they're walking home, creating a safe passage for students so that they can feel comfortable and confident in the people that are supposed to protect them. Yes.
Thank you for that. So I see that there was a question about the hearing for Rebecca. Rebecca, can you answer that for us, please?
Sure. First of all, I appreciate being able to be a part of this conversation. I always love hearing what our team is doing with, our schools and our school educators to help our youth. And one of the things I just wanted to add to that conversation is that there was a poll done, I think in like 2021, when students were going back into the schools after the COVID remote, setup had ended, and there was an uptick in the number of weapons that were coming into the school. And of course, the immediate response from the media and even, some of our elected officials, not you, Assembly member, was that, that the students were caring because they wanted to hurt each other, and that they were there because of, gang beefs, and that they were there because they wanted to cause harm. And after actually talking to the young people and polling them and really giving them the time to answer for themselves, they said they were caring because they were scared, and they felt like they needed whether it was guns or other types of weapons, for self-defense. And I think it's really always important to reiterate as a part of these conversations that the vast majority of illegal gun owners are caring for the same reason that, Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz claim that you need to have a gun for lawful gun ownership, for self-defense. And yes, they may have not gone through a background check and no, they haven't gone through any training. But the purpose that they have it is because they think that guns protect them. And it's important that we recognize that, because we as a society have, through whether it's because of our, government officials, our former president, whether it's because of, law enforcement or even security, we kind of continue to push this message that, at least in some contexts, guns protect you. And so it's very difficult to teach young people who are afraid that guns don't protect you. And it's our job to figure out how to reframe that message and to say exactly that. Yes, there's a constitutional right to have a gun for self-defense, but that doesn't mean that the public health research actually supports that proposition. Those two things conflict, and we need to keep educating the public and educating the media about that to make sure that there's that understanding, because they're caring for the same reason. And I think that that flows well into the question that I received, which was, in her testimony, was Rebecca able to make the points about some of the other states having higher crime rates? What was the response for Jim Jordan? So the Democrats were only allowed to have 2 experts. The Republicans, I believe, had 6 or 7 because they have the majority. Myself and this other expert, Jim Kessler, and I both emphasized the difference, the disparity in crime rates in other states, very specifically through statistics. We talked about how high the crime rate is in a place like Ohio or in Florida, or even in Wyoming. There's such a higher suicide rate there. And they just ignored us. I mean, they just fully ignored us. They talked over us. I did get some questions. I got one question from Jim Jordan. He looked at me and he said, Ms. Fischer, if the House Democrats were so supportive of reducing gun violence and gun reform, why did they pass legislation to prevent gun violence? And my response, to the extent that he let me finish, was actually the House Democrats did pass some legislation last session, and they would pass so much more and get it passed by the Senate and have it signed by the president if it wasn't blocked by you. And I said, so there's still a chance if, and I had to say this very, very quickly because he started talking over me, and then switched, which is, you, the current Congress, can go back to Washington, leave our city and go back to Washington, and you can pass federal gun reform if that's going to be the question you have to ask me. But I actually took it as a compliment that he very quickly just realized that the only wrestling tactic he had against me was to talk over me, and he moved on to one of his witnesses. But there is just a complete disconnect. I mean, we were just talking right past each other. They were making up statistics about crime in New York City. And, there was another, this is another little story if you didn't watch the whole four-hour hearing. At one point towards the end, the representative from Wyoming, which is like in the top 5 for gun violence rates, said that she accused me of secretly smiling at the Democrats when the Republicans were talking about guns, because it's clear that I think an inanimate object is what's causing all this gun violence. But why aren't we talking about what she referred to as psychosis, that is, and the deterioration of the moral fabric of our society that's causing gun violence? And of course, we talk about trauma, we talk about mental health, we talk about education here. We're not talking about that as a replacement for gun control. The two things have to go together, but we're certainly not stigmatizing individuals who are suffering from a mental health trauma. And she made a horribly transphobic comment too. It was disgusting. And then of course, she didn't even ask me a question. She just mentioned me and accused me of this, and then moved on to one of her witnesses as well. So, the takeaway from this is that I was not there to convince those folks in the room that guns don't protect you and they should get on our side. I was there to make sure that the facts were on the record, and that to the extent that they were trying to put on this performance and show to, frame the messaging to get on TV and get their clips on Fox News, that we were getting our clips too, and that our position on behalf of reality and behalf of New Yorkers in New York City was also being presented. And a final spin on this is that there was a piece written about it in the New Yorker. And while I think that, it's been pretty accurate that, of course, the real focused intent of this hearing on behalf of the Republicans was to make, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg look bad without any qualifying facts. But it also is because this is what the New Yorker's perspective was. It's also because the House Republicans have realized they're not really going to get anything done in Congress. And so they're basically on a tour. They are on a field trip. That's why they're doing these field hearings. They're on a field trip around the country with an attempt to create this messaging campaign in an effort to go after the Democrats and to go after President Biden. And we know this in New York, because public safety is at the top of everyone's minds in this country, and there's such a divided view in terms of how to solve that, this is their way to get their messaging out. And so, my final thing would be, it is so important for all of us to ensure that we're getting the right messaging out, that we're getting the right messaging out regardless of what party we affiliate with, that's based on public health data, that's based on the facts, and that frankly, like, we come together as stakeholders to make sure that our messaging is aligned and to make sure that we're explaining it in a way that people truly understand and can buy into. Because the Republicans, and I don't want to just say Republicans, the extremists in the Republican Party have done a very good job of getting their message out about law and order and how to solve this and it's certainly not to protect our children, and it certainly is to protect guns. So I hope I answered your question with a little bit more, anecdotal stuff. And over the course of the next few weeks, we'll be releasing more clips from the hearing itself, and hopefully have the opportunity to talk about this more.
Thank you so much for that, Rebecca. I have one last question that I'm receiving, and it's for you, Assembly Member. I think folks want to know, would this bill help fill gaps for funding in existing after-school programs, clubs that are needed now more than ever? Trauma care includes the need for safe spaces to play music, rhythm in the neighborhoods. So they just really want to know whether or not this particular bill would increase funding for after-school programs.
The answer is yes. And how this is done again is that it really puts the onus on the school districts to craft programs based off of these block grants that work for those school districts. So you are in essence filling that gap. And you're doing two things. One, you're filling that gap, but two, you're also making sure that there is programming and resources for students on the after school hours. And I think the sweet part of this, Barry, is that you're leaving more academically astute and you're leaving with more of a skill set to be able to deal with the everyday life. A lot of our students complain that when they go to school, they're not learning things that they can actually apply in real life. And what this legislation seeks to do is to allow our students and challenge our students to be able to apply something in real life. Conflict resolution can be applied right after you leave the school building and walk to that corner store, or right after you leave the school building and walk to that park. And that's critical. We want to train up our young people and give them life skills to be able to compete and be safe.
Thank you so much. I just want to let folks know that in the question and answer portion of the Zoom, you can find links to Assemblymember Anderson's bills that he's mentioned, and our action to email legislators to support the school Anti-Gun Violence Education Act. So all that information is there. It is 8:15, so we're going to be winding down. I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists here today. In closing, the issue of gun violence in schools is a complex and multifaceted issue. But if we work together and we take proactive measures, the ones that we've been talking about today, we can create a better future for our young people, right? They deserve safety. They deserve safety. That is their right to be safe. And we have to do what we can to make sure that they are healthy and safe and happy. So thank you so much again. I think our email addresses are also in the chat. Please reach out to us, email us. If you have a school in mind where you think we need a program like Reaction, definitely email us. We'll figure it out. We'd love to hear your voices, and we want to continue to connect. But again, thank you so much to everyone on the panel. I hope you have a great night. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Stay safe and be well, everyone. Thank you so much.
Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.